A wildfire unlike anything this town, this state have ever seen.
For most people, the severity will be measured in lives lost or property lost, and this is pretty close to the top, followed probably by the Dude Creek Fire in 1990.
19 firefighters killed, overrun by fierce flames, families devastated, communities scarred. But with time comes healing.
It's been an amazing weaving of love and gratitude and hard work.
The fire at Yarnell Hill, 1 year later. This is Arizona Week. Hello, and thank you for joining us. I'm Lorriane Rivera, and this is Yarnell Hill. Established in the late 1800s, today about 650 people call this town home. 1 year ago, lightning sparked a massive wildfire that burned for nearly 2 weeks and consumed about 13 square miles. 19 men from the Granite Mountain Interagency Hotshot Crew were killed, devastating communities in this region. In the days following the catastrophe, donations poured in from all over the world. Here's my interview with Francis Lechner from the Yarnell Hill Recovery Group. Tell me about the fire that happened here a year ago. You were here yourself and you saw what was on the horizon.
We'd gotten some of the red alert notices, so my husband and I actually evacuated late Sunday afternoon. We saw smoke and fire, and I was focusing on getting out, so I wasn't as aware of all the fire activity as some of our other residents were.
What has really been the role of the Yarnell Hill Recovery Group here?
The mission statement pretty much says it. Our goal, our mission is to identify the needs of the unmet needs of residents and business owners here in Yarnell, and to help identify ways to meet those needs. So what that means is identifying all kinds of things, whether it's help with housing, with fencing, needs for counseling, food, whatever those were. And it wasn't our job to meet them all ourselves, but to figure out, here's the resources available to us. And it's been a great collaborative effort with all kinds of volunteer organizations, the county, the state. There's a lot of resources that have come to our aid.
And we're talking about an extraordinary outpouring of support to this community.
It's been unbelievable. I'll try to get through this without crying, but it's actually it's one of the key words here for us is gratitude. We're very clear that if it hadn't been for the tragedy of the firefighters, we might have been another fire that happened off in the off in the back country and been off the radar screen pretty quickly. And as a result, we're very clear that their sacrifice has meant a huge difference for us. And so we feel that the best memorial that we can do for those 19 hotshots is to make Yarnell absolutely the most thriving, vibrant community we possibly can.
And it was before the fire, just maybe not on the scale that some people would hope for.
Well, it's a mixed bag. There's a lot of people come up here, they're wanting just quiet, they want to leave the madness of the city behind, they're up here to retire, they want it quiet. So I think some people would feel like, we don't want it too busy. But the people who've chosen to live here want to be able to continue to get their groceries here, want to get gas here. We were very lucky in that the downtown area of Yarnell did not burn. So our community center was safe, the library is safe. But over the years, there have been some business falling away. The bank closed down, that hurt our grocery store business. So there's been some trajectory downward, and it's been cause for concern for a lot of members of the community. So in the wake of this fire, it was like, we have to do whatever we can, and then there's been a huge outpouring of people to help.
It had to have been pretty refreshing to know that you could look into these families' faces and tell them, it's going to be okay, we can help you fix your home.
Oh, it was huge. It was unbelievable. Within 2 weeks of the fire, there were 17 or 18 RVs or motorhomes donated to the church. So we were able to put people in houses. Some people left to either stay with family or friends in other parts of the state. There are a couple of people here who loaned their houses. They said they could stay in them. One person did a reduced rent sort of situation. So we had lots of people, and we were able to house them. In many cases, people wanted to stay right at their home site, so there would be an RV right next to the devastation, but that gave them time to go through things slowly, look for things, mementos from home, and there's some amazing stories about people finding old wedding wings, some things that burned up in a safe and other things survived. I mean, the variety is unbelievable.
There are people who are underinsured or perhaps uninsured, and a lot of these families you've been able to help get right back to where they were before the flames.
That's correct. We had about 10 residents who were uninsured, and in many cases those folks, the houses were uninsurable, and so our commitment was we want to help our community rebuild. And there were a lot of donations designated specifically for the uninsured. We had 9 of those 10 people are now in homes. They all now either have insurance or are in the process of getting it. So everybody's had a chance to learn some lessons from this.
You would not have been able to do any of this without the media coverage all over the country and people just saying, I want to help.
Oh yes, we had letters come in from addressed to the mayor of Yarnell, which there is none, we're unincorporated. From New Zealand, we had emails from all over. You know, although we're a small community, about 650 people, we all have friends and connections all over. So people emailed from Australia, from Europe. One of our residents who lost her home learned about the fire as she was sitting on hotel steps in Prague. There it was. So people donated from all over. I would have to say a huge amount, the biggest proportion of help in terms of individuals was from the Prescott area. When you look down on the webpage that we've developed, it shows thank you. We've said the first name and the last initial of everyone who's donated and the city they're from, and far and away, Prescott has really come to our aid.
What are you most proud of when you take a look at this town and the devastation, but knowing that it is slowly regaining the strength that it had?
I think we are an amazing mosaic. We are clear that that horrible things have happened, and we're not through the grieving, the loss process by any means. We don't confuse rebuilding with healing. It's a longer process. But the amount of skills that have, people come to the fore, both within the community and outside, it's been an amazing weaving of love and gratitude and hard work. So that's what I'm most proud of.
The flames burned more than 130 structures, leaving a quarter of the families in this town without homes. More than $1.5 million worth of donations and tens of thousands of volunteer hours. It's been a long road to recovery. Here's my interview with Steve Steinfeld, a homeowner whose house burned in the fire. Steve, take me back to June 30th at 2 o'clock when you sent an email to your family and friends and said, we're okay.
Well, at the time, I had gone up on the hill and back to work on a well, and I saw that the fire was going the other way. It was about probably 3.5, 4 miles away, and it was heading towards Peoples Valley. Now, of course, I wasn't happy for them, but I thought at that time that we were in the clear.
Then you go back inside, and 4 o'clock comes around, and what do you see?
Well, at 4 o'clock, right around 4, I saw the firemen coming out where they have gone back in to fight the fire, and they were coming out in a hurry with trucks and men and everything. Were just zipping out of here. So I walked back up on the hill behind our house, and I felt the wind had turned and the flames were coming. I could see the flames coming.
What did it look like? What did it feel like?
The whole horizon was covered with flame. And I could see that it was coming really fast because of the wind. I thought we would have maybe half an hour, but it didn't turn out. We didn't have that long. So.
You run inside, you tell your wife we need to go.
Yep, and we had a few things ready because we had, anytime up here, anytime you even smell barbecue smoke, you're checking to see what's going on because it's always dry. It's always this time of the year. So we did get a few things together by the door, computer, things that we really, really need. I had everything in a drawer in a file cabinet. So I just pull the drawer out of the file cabinet and take that along.
You leave for a few days and then you happen to see a photo of your home in a newspaper.
Well, yeah, actually we saw it. We had been looking because no one seemed to be able to tell us whether our house had burned. We were 90% sure it had. In fact, I had already filed the insurance claim based on the fact that I was so sure it would be gone. But then we found a picture on the internet that was it was our house. So.
Take me back to that emotion, what you were thinking, what you're feeling, and how you're envisioning moving forward.
Well, when we first saw the pictures, of course, it was sort of a mix because we were expecting it. We were not expecting it to look so bad. It was just totally. I mean, you know, I thought I'd see pieces of the wall standing or parts of a shed, or I was hoping some trees would be standing, but there was nothing.
You and your wife made the decision to rebuild in the same plot of land, and you're well on your way to moving into your new home here soon. A lot of people might question why here again.
Well, we moved here originally because we wanted to be in a small town. And, you know, there's 4 acres. It gives me room to play with. I had paths, ways. I had a little park back there. But anyway, the 2 biggest reasons we rebuilt is we as much as we, like Yuma, lived there a lot of years, we couldn't imagine going back and spending our summers there again. And because the people, there's a very, very good group of people here. I mean, the more people said, "Are you rebuilding?" the more we said, "Are you rebuilding?" And the more people that said, "Well, yeah, if you're gonna," so it sort of was like that. And also because the rocks are beautiful. I mean, the trees are gone, but the brush comes back, and the rocks are, you know, still beautiful. And the climate didn't change. It's hot right at the moment, but you know, the rainy season will come, and overall it's 20 degrees better than Phoenix and Yuma, so that's why we're here still.
You're not mad, you don't blame anyone.
I don't. I'm not mad. I'm sad, but I'm sad for what happened to people, to the firefighters, and to us, to everyone here. But, you know, I don't blame. I can't point a finger. There's no one to point a finger at as far as I'm concerned. People make decisions based on what they know at the time, and it's easy to look back. So,
Looking back and kind of reflecting on that moment where you were standing up on the hillside and seeing the flames, I mean, no one would have ever thought that such a tragedy was taking place so close to your home.
well, mostly the wind change, which is a big factor in a lot of things, was a complete surprise. I mean, that's why, partly why, you know, you could say, well, that could have been predicted, but it was pretty darn short notice to get everyone moved around and that kind of thing. So
You were underinsured, but because of the outpouring of support to this community, you're able to rebuild.
we can. The recovery group has helped us, and we of course have to do some on our own, but that's to be expected. And I'm, looking forward to Yarnell being good. It'll be different, but it'll be good. People came from everywhere and helped as best they could. APS was in here, the county was in here. I mean, I just don't see what, there probably is a few things I didn't see that could have been done better, but from what I saw, even evacuation, when people were leaving, and people were taking turns, they were waiting for each other. It was short notice, but everybody got out of here.
The fire put Yarnell Hill on the map, the tragedy forever a part of this town's legacy. The Arizona Republic covered the fire and the aftermath extensively. The publication nominated for a Pulitzer Prize. Here's Ann Ryman, a senior reporter from the Arizona Republic.
I first actually heard about it. For some reason I was monitoring Twitter that night, and you started hearing reports of firefighters being missing and getting separated from their group on Twitter. And then I remember seeing a tweet that the firefighters were dead. And it was almost like I looked at it, and I'm sure other people had the same reaction. You just couldn't believe it. It was just something that you couldn't process. And it turned out it was true. My immediate role for the newspaper was, once we found out who the firefighters were, was to try to reach out to the family of Eric Marsh, the superintendent of the Granite Mountain Hotshots. And I was able to talk with friends of his, and we also were able to get one of the few interviews that his parents did. And they just told a story of somebody who firefighting was essentially his life. He lived and breathed firefighting. He had started the Granite Mountain Hotshots. And just they told the story of just a remarkable person.
What was that like, knocking on a family's door, making that cold phone call to get that perspective?
I mean, it's always a little bit, you're always a little bit nervous because you're not sure how you're going to be received. The challenge with this story is there was so much media attention that some of the families quickly became very overwhelmed, and they weren't able to talk about it anymore, and they didn't want to talk about it really with the media anymore. So that was a challenge from a reporting standpoint, but one that's very understandable.
The press really descended on that area for weeks at that point. Did you take a moment as a journalist to step back and just understand the magnitude of what you were facing as a journalist?
I did, and you could see how people were kind of weary of the media attention, understandably. I tried to be very understanding to people when I would go and talk with the evacuees at the shelters. They had done so many interviews that they were weary by that point. So what I would do is I would just kind of start talking to them as a person at first, and I wouldn't take out my notebook right away or try to just very coldly ask them all these questions, just more have a conversation with them. And I mean, I met people there that I didn't even end up using in stories, and I met other people that I did, but bottom line is you wanted to treat people, I always approach it as, if that was my mother or father, how would I treat them?
Right. This story is something in all your years of being a journalist, I mean, you'll never forget it.
Absolutely not. I mean, this is one of those stories that has stayed with me and will stay with me. It's one of those stories that I spent a great deal of time outside of working hours thinking about, the people who had lost loved ones and the families who had lost their homes. As a journalist, a lot of times you write a story and then you kind of move on to the next story. And in this case, this is one of those that you don't move on from. You continue to think about it.
What do you think was your greatest challenge in covering this story?
Probably the biggest challenge was a lot of people did not want to talk because of litigation. And so that was a challenge where you would try to reach out to somebody to get their side of the story or to tell as clear a picture of what went on as possible. And they wouldn't return your calls, or some of them would say, well, I'd like to talk about it, but because of the litigation, I can't. And so I think there still are a lot of things we don't know. Some of it has come out in the past months through, transcripts from, investigations. But there's a lot that we may find out, months from now or even years from now.
When you were covering the fire and kind of living in and out of the Prescott Yarnell area, what do you remember seeing and feeling and smelling while you're there? I mean, it was a surreal experience.
It was very, very intense. I think the moment I remember most was I was at the evacuation shelter when the line of hearses came by carrying all the Granite Mountain Hotshots, and some of the evacuees and other people from the town went out and stood by the side of the road. And I just remember when the first hearse came by, you could not even, if a pin had dropped, you could not even hear it. It was so, everyone was so quiet and so respectful and just so devastated. And I remember I had my iPhone out and I was videotaping as the hearse went by. And when I go back and look at the videotape now, you know, it's a good minute. It's a good minute where the hearse are just, you have one after another coming by. And I think you really realize in looking at that just how many people died and the magnitude of it.
As a newspaper and garnering the attention of an award for covering this fire, that's never what this is about. It's about telling stories and meeting people, but there had to have been some pride in knowing that you covered a tragedy quite well.
Yeah, and it's almost something you don't really think of at the time. I think any journalist, you know, if you're in a situation where there's news and you're covering it, you just approach it and you try to do the best job you can. And you don't even realize early on sometimes the magnitude of it. I mean, it quickly becomes apparent, you know, that it's a big story because you get, you know, a lot of national media attention. But at the time, you're just trying to do the best job you can to provide, you know, the most accurate information that you can to people.
The last time a major fire hit this community was back in the 1960s. This time around, the flames were estimated to reach 200 feet. Here's Steve Pine, a professor at Arizona State University and fire historian.
What struck me was how concentrated it was. It was much steeper, narrower. Hills were closer to the city, so everything was magnified relative to what my expectations were.
In studying fires in the state of Arizona, where does this one rank as far as the severity of it?
Well, in terms of, I mean, there are different measures of severity, and for most people, the severity will be measured in lives lost or property lost, and this is pretty close to the top, followed probably by the Dude Creek Fire in 1990. We've had large fires, but they haven't necessarily caused fatalities or lots of property damage.
Can you describe why this fire took off the way that it did, what you've been able to learn?
Well, I don't have any special insight and the fire didn't introduce anything new to fire behavior that the fire community hasn't known for a long time. Steep terrain, dense brush, drought, maximum temperatures, winds, and then thunderstorm downdrafts, dry downdrafts on top of that. Boy, this is all textbook fire behavior, and all those compass points were all aligned in the same direction towards maximum fire intensity.
If you would describe how exactly this fire sort of took on a life of its own. It's kind of been described as a new normal, these fires we're seeing in the state?
Sure. Well, a lot of things are reorienting the fire scene in the state. And we've got a lot of different landscapes in the state, so they're all burned differently. But generally what's happening is that we're into a long-term drought cycle, depending who you talk to, for 20, 25, maybe 30 years with breaks, but generally a droughty time, particularly for the winter. We've got a buildup of fuels, combustibles around, whether it be in the lower elevation with woody plants or in the upper elevation with congested forests, much thicker than has existed historically, or in many cases even in evolutionary time for these species. And we're putting lots of other woody constructions out there in the forms of houses and land use changes. So you put all of those together and they all point to more intense fires and more severe fire damages, and a real distortion in terms of where we have to put limited firefighting resources. So we're having to direct them more and more to those communities, which is the only reasonable thing to do, and that's allowing fires to burn over larger areas more intensely.
The Yarnell community, had that area ever seen a fire historically similar?
Well, I don't know similar, it's certainly burned. I mean, it's an ideal environment for burning. The last wildfires were in the 1960s, I think the mid-1960s. And then the state of Arizona tried to introduce some controlled burns, late 60s, early 70s, but that was shut down. So most of that area has not had a fire for maybe 50 years, which is a long time in brush, chaparral like that.
Can you describe just the overall wildfire picture in the state of Arizona? I mean, our drought, the climate make this, as you've said, the perfect place for these sorts of catastrophes. What is the issue in Arizona that this keeps happening year after year?
Well, Arizona, by its very composition, its geology, its biology, its climate, is primed to burn. But everything we've done and not done over the last century, and what is happening with nature, seems to be pushing it towards extreme forms. So the vegetation, we've lost most of our grassy cover. It's become brush, it's become woody plants in the lower elevations. In the upper elevations, the forests are becoming overgrown with lots of reproduction, probably well beyond what these communities can flourish with. They're too crowded. So all that from the fuel side is negative. The other half of the fuel side are land use changes. So we put lots of areas into protected sites, wilderness areas, pristine preserves of one kind. So we're not going to interfere. Well, that allows those conditions to worsen. That's not necessarily a bad thing, but can we keep those fires within those zones or not? And the flip side is that we've begun this sort of ex-urban sprawl. I mean, we're recolonizing what had been a rural landscape with houses. And people are not living on the land, they're just living in it. They're not interacting with it. They're not clearing it out. They're not extracting their livelihood out of those settlements. So it's just an exurb, really. And that forces you to direct your resources to protecting those communities more and more. And they're crowding that landscape. We've lost that big buffer, that rural buffer landscape that gave us some room to maneuver. That's going. So you add it all up and there's less room to maneuver. The fires are becoming more intense. We've been in a drought for, what, 20 to 30 years, depending how you want to count it. You know, everything's lined up the wrong way. So until something on a large scale breaks, there's no reason to think that we won't continue to see the kinds of fires that we've been experiencing.
And that's our program from Yarnell Hill. For all of us at Arizona Week, I'm Lorriane Rivera.